All right, good evening everyone, and thank you very much for joining in with our live. Um, Tonight we are going to be chatting all about different designing options and what is good and what is not. All right, so if you have tuned in with our last two um, webinar episodes, you'll notice that we do have an open floor in terms of questions and comments. So if you do have a question, drop it in the comment section and we'll definitely be able to answer that for you. Also, if you do have a question after the session has ended, you're welcome to send us an email or even a Facebook direct message, and we'll be able to answer that in tomorrow's session then. All right, so before we start with the actual presentation, this is just what to look out for while we do go through it. Things to avoid, which we'll go into finer detail in, is the very fine flaws, as well as hidden halos. We'll get to why they have the name hidden halo very shortly, as well as micro setting. Then we're going to have a look at a few tips of maximizing your visual miles, getting more bang for your buck or flash for cash, and then also a few tips on using your own stones and manipulating the look of a diamond. All right, so again, just before we start, if you do have any questions, please post them in the comments. Also, if you do have a friend in mind that might benefit from this, please do send them the link, ask them to watch it. If they are unavailable at the moment, please ask them to watch the video, which will be posted to our Facebook page. All right, we are going to jump into the very first design option, and we're just going to have a look at this in a bit more detail. So if we look at the picture, if you look at the centerpiece for a start, you'll see that it looks very, very fine when it's viewed from a distance. If you look at the images just above it and below it, you'll see that it actually consists of a few, well, there's structure to it. There are claws, even though it doesn't look like there's claws from a distance, but that is how it looks if you take a closer look. This is particularly not really one of the best settings if you are rough with your hands. It is a ring which is prone to getting hooked, and it needs a lot of attention in terms of at least having the ring brought in for a checkup once or twice a year, seeing that the claws are prone to getting hooked on clothing, especially in winter, or even just hard surfaces. For instance, an example is a lady that works in a pharmaceutical industry, the metal racks where she puts her hands in and out many times a day. That's a very good example and one experience example we've seen in the past already. Yeah, so when looking at designs, going extremely fine is not always the best option, as Charlotte mentioned. So just be careful of having a look at too many fine options, especially on Pinterest. Some of the rings on Pinterest will only last for that photo shoot and will break afterwards. Some designs are simply too fine to be practical at all, and that doesn't it's not restricted to anyone that's hard on their hands. Some rings will break even if you are someone who does absolutely nothing every day. If you stand up from the couch and put too much pressure on it, you might bend such a flimsy ring. The next ring we're going to look at is a beautiful ring. I must say that it is quite the looker. A few things with this is it's not an everyday ring. It's definitely functional for special occasions. However, if we have a look at these points right here, they are the thinnest part of this ring and also the furthest away from the center. That means if it does get hooked, like Charles mentioned, on pieces of clothing, or if you're wearing a scarf or fancy dress, you could tear your dress, which is probably also a very bad thing to happen. But secondly, by tearing your dress, you could bend your ring. So you have a twofold disaster unfolding in front of you. And that is just because of these sharp points here, which could cause a problem and then could break at the seams here. However, it's not an impossible design and also not a completely impractical design, just not for everyday wear. Alright, so the next ring we're going to have a look at is quite a beautiful ring from the top, I must say. And this is where we get to a hidden halo. So the halo is called a hidden halo for the reason that it is invisible from the top. Hidden halo, in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, doesn't add too much to a ring, other than complications. The reason why I say that is the underbezel, which is this part between the claws here, that is meant to strengthen the claws so that can hold the stone a bit more snug. Now, by adding small stones into this already thin band, there are quite a few problems that appear. One is that you have now weakened this band, which is meant to give structure to the ring. The reason why it's weakened is you are drilling holes into it to put stones in. Secondly, you are then using what little metal is left to keep these stones in place. And that is a very small amount of metal, which means stones are more prone to fall out, especially in an invisible halo or a sub-halo or a hidden halo. And it doesn't add much visually. As you can see from the top, you would not know that there was a sub-halo. So that also, it's more labor costs, it's more diamonds that you have to put in. It's quite a bit more money that you spend for not much visually. Actually spending money for something which weakens your structure. If we zoom in on the top image to the 4 claws holding the oval diamond, you'll see those sharp claws are called cat claws, which is actually a beautiful design. They work on almost all stone types, just personal preference once again. It's interesting thing is you can always get round claws again from going from cat claw back to round, but you can't extend a round cut claw and all of a sudden make a cat claw. So there's an opportunity for you to do both if you get tired of the one look after about 3 months or so. It's just a matter of interest in a design, aesthetic piece of the design which looks quite nice. I'm personally a fan of it. It looks ladylike.
I agree with Shaul on the cat claws. Excuse me, the cat claws. It does fit well into almost every stone's facets. It does just give it a bit of an edge as well. Now the last point that we want to look at is the same as the underbezel or the hidden halo. Notice that this ring has stones on the claws itself as well. Now, for all the reasons we mentioned why a sub-halo or a hidden halo is not the best idea, all those reasons apply to the claw itself as well. Also, weakening a structure with stones that you won't be able to see, very little metal to keep those stones in place. So that can cause quite a few problems. Now, if you do have a sub-halo, please do not think that we are throwing shade on your ring. Just bear in mind that you need to take care of your ring a bit more delicately, just so not to have a few stones fall out of it. Alright, the next ring that we're going to have a look at is what we refer to as micro setting. Now let me zoom out here quickly. Micro setting. So this is basically a lot of small stones set next to each other, and this can range from quite a few stones put next to each other or a lot. In this case, you'll see that you can't really distinguish between the claws and the stones themselves. So micro setting, as the name suggests, is extremely small stones set next to each other to create an illusion.
Now, to play off on the word of illusion, is that in this particular design, there might not be 50 stones, but every so many metal balls, if you want to call it, there will be a stone just to give it that sparkle. But it isn't diamonds packed next to each other tightly. Once again, you're getting flash for cash. It is a good way to have it appear as though there are many diamonds from a distance. And on a close inspection, you'll see that there's not really many diamonds, and you really have to look close in some cases. The metal will be cut, what you call a diamond cut. That is how the metal is formed. So it shines because the metal now has facets and it reflects the light. Smart way to get more bling if you have a budget which is not extensive.
Now, if we look at a true micro setting, instead of using diamond cuts, if you do use diamonds all the way through, please do keep in mind that with such small stones, the labor ends up being more of a cost than the stone itself. So you're paying more to put in the diamond than the diamond itself is worth. We wouldn't suggest using microsetting extensively. The reason for that, again, is extremely small diamonds with extremely small claws. A microsetting cannot be guaranteed for any more than 2 months, really, because we have absolutely no control on how rough you are with your rings. If you knock your hand on a door, even on some microsettings, that might be enough force to dislodge a stone. Because remember, it's somewhat of a weak force, but concentrated on a single claw, which then has enough force to move it or even displace a stone. So just bear in mind, again, if your ring has microsetting, you're not insulting your ring. Rather, if you have microsetting, be careful and also bring your ring in for a checkup. Again, a checkup is for free. We'll have a look at your claws. If there is anything that does need work on it, we'll let you know and we can take it from there.
The next image we're going to be looking at is once again a very good example of a ring which structure has been played with in the negative. So you'll see on the band, on the shank, where your finger goes through, it has diamonds on the top and it has diamonds on the side. So if you think of that, the thickness of the band itself, it would probably be around about 1.6 by 1.6 or 1.6 by 1.4 millimeters. Now you've taken away a lot of the metal, because on the other side of the band there's also diamonds, so that you've got a complete shine, or let's call it bling. Now that is not the best structure. This particular ring also has a hidden halo, also with a sub halo, or let's call it a second halo, which has weakened the structure just because of the many holes being drilled into the metal to once again intercept the small stones.
Yeah, so as Charles mentioned, having diamonds from 3 angles basically means you're drilling into an already thin band from 3 separate angles, which means you are taking away close to 50% of the metal weight just for adding diamonds, which could also fall out, but now you run the risk of your band breaking as well. So that is a dangerous way to add bling to your ring. Also, I won't say the risk ratio is really worth it. The next ring that we're going to move over to isn't a terrible design. It's actually quite an interesting design using salt and pepper diamonds. And if you've seen our episode 1, you'll have a bit of a better idea of salt and pepper diamonds. So this ring, again, it's not an everyday ring. It could work for special occasions. The problem comes in with that thin point there and that. If this ring were to break, it would be at one of those 2 points. Excuse me. So the setting of the stones are completely safe, even though these only have 2 settings, or 2 claws rather. 100% safe. Your stones won't go anywhere unless a claw breaks off. Obviously, if the thing keeping it in place is missing, then it might not stay in place. So that is just something to keep in mind. Again, if anything in your ring ever rattles at all, even in the slightest, it means it's loose. Bring it in for a checkup immediately before something does actually go missing.
Alright, this is also another example of the illusion setting. Now these are diamonds which are tightly packed. Now an interesting thing to note is that, let's say for instance all of these diamonds together have a combined weight of 60 points, which is 0.60 carats. It will cost much less than a single stone of the same weight. These are the fraction of the price. However, remember again, as Dante mentioned, that you pay per stone, meaning that your labor cost increases. It's a very good way to get a flash for cash. It's very beautiful. You get surface area which is all diamond, even though it's not a single diamond the size of that.
I agree 100% with Charles. Yeah, there's actually nothing much more to say about this ring other than it's a very clever way to get a very good surface coverage of diamonds. So the next ring we're going to have a look at is actually quite a clever design. You'll notice that it is a kite cut stone. This is actually moss agate, just for interest's sake. It is also a very good alternative to salt and pepper diamonds. Notice that it has a wishbone ring covering the one side. Now this wishbone ring does serve a purpose, not just to look good, but having a ring that covers the tip of a stone is very beneficial because it adds basically a barrier. So if you were to knock it, you would connect with the wishbone instead of the stone itself. The reason why that is so useful is generally the pointy parts of a stone are the easiest to break, whether it be a diamond or any other stone. The thin bits or the pointy bits can chip quite easily. So that is a very good way to ensure that the stone doesn't get chipped. You could also flip the wishbone around to go on the long side and have a bit of an elongated wishbone, which again just adds a barrier to that ring.
Now this is a very good example of, I would say, perhaps one of the worst designs when it comes to your practicality. I mean, think for yourself, if that stone gets caught on one of the ends, which can easily happen, whether it be a piece of clothing or a hard surface, or even just walking past a door or a wall, your stone will snap. There's a very big chance of it snapping. And if you think of how the stone is set, right, if it is clamped from the side, surely it can still move forward and back, which means it will be tied down with glue, which won't put a nice finishing to the ring. Even though it's done neatly, it will still be visible, seeing that this stone in particular is quite transparent.
Yeah, I agree with Charles that it is probably the worst design that we've seen tonight, perhaps ever. But yes, this is again why we don't necessarily want people to think that everything that you see on Pinterest is, first of all, possible, and then second of all, practical. In this case, it is possible, however, not practical whatsoever. And this is just one example from Pinterest. There are quite a few with extravagant ideas. And again, that ring might only last for the photo shoot's duration. It might fall apart right afterwards. And there's no way of you knowing if the ring actually is practical, other than, well, first of all, using a bit of common sense, and then second of all, if you doubt a design, do ask us. We have been working with rings for years. We know what works, we know what doesn't, we know what causes complications. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask. The next ring that we're going to look at is quite a clever design. This is what is known as mulgrave. You'll see these little balls of white gold or platinum or whatever metal this is. You'll see these little balls that go all around. It kind of adds a bit of a sparkle to the whole ring with little to no extra cost, without adding extra diamonds to the whole ring. It's a very good way to add a bit more sparkle to the ring.
Instead of having big flat surfaces with glare and reflection, the mulgrave breaks it up a little bit. I think that's all that you can say about this ring. It's smart. You get more bling for what you pay for.
100%. The next ring that we're going to have a look at is what we'll refer to as a full eternity ring. Now, that terminology just means that the stones go all the way around the stone. With such a stone, 100% beautiful to look at. However, 2 points that I just want to talk about is, first of all, if the ring doesn't fit you 100% perfectly, resizing such a ring is going to be very, very difficult. The reason for that is your ring size might not have enough space to add a whole stone or remove a whole stone, which means when sizing such a ring, you'll end up with a bar of metal somewhere to make up for that space that cannot accommodate a whole new stone. And then the second point is, if the ring is on your finger, you can only ever see half of it, if even that much. So you have now got stones going all the way around. If you want a full eternity, go for it. If you're looking for a bit more of a of an affordable option, you can look at a half eternity, because again, from the top of, or from a top view, it will look like stones are going all the way around.
Yeah, the one downside to having a full eternity ring where the diamonds go right around is that your ring makes contact with hard surfaces, and every day, let's say you take it off every second day or every day, and you put it back on, every day a new piece, well, a new section of the claws will then make contact with abrasive surfaces, such as tables in general. The next image is also a full eternity. However, you can only see the first half. The other half is behind the finger.
So that is, again, from the top view, you can only see half. The following picture is a half eternity, which looks the same from the top view. So unless you are going to be waving at people with both sides of your hand, no one will ever know that you have a half eternity instead of a full eternity.
Yeah, it's not only got to do with what the people will see and what the people will think. It's first of all, it saves you money. You're saving on the diamonds, you're saving on the labor, and also, well, you can't see it. I think that's the most obvious of all. Your, let's call it, your maintenance in your full eternity will be slightly more, seeing that your claws, which are the fine parts, a claw is less than a millimeter, which falls over your stone. That will make contact on every single, well, a different spot every single time you wear the ring. But that's it, the pros and cons. But whatever you wish to have, whether it be half eternity or a full eternity, we can do that. Your desire comes first, even though we will always offer advice. There's a difference between an opinion and advice. If there's advice to give, seeing that it's going to be beneficial in certain ways and negative in other ways, we'll mention that to you so that you make an informed decision before going ahead with your desired ring.
With that being said, the following ring is a very good example of advice and opinion. So before we watch this video, this ring was actually made from a client's all these stones over here around, all these round rubies are the client's own stones. These diamonds up here are the stones of the client, as well as the main pear shape down here. So she just brought in old jewelry, wanting to make something new. She was tired of her old jewelry, but she had no idea what she wanted to do. She had a pear shape. She wanted to trade it in for a marquee shape. Now, that might have gotten her a stone of somewhat the same size, but most probably slightly smaller. So with that in mind, we sat down with her and came up with a plan to use her existing stones to create this illusion of a marquee cut stone in the center. I'll just pause it here. We have a full frontal of it. So you'll see that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only stones we added were these blue and pink on the top.
Yeah, which means that the client had a massive saving. If she would have traded in her pear shape, which is in the bottom half, she would have not had enough money to trade it for a size of the full visual space that is being highlighted right now. So it was actually a very smart design by Dante. He was the person that saw the client, and he came with this idea which he maximized the use of her existing jewelry, the stones, and also the saving on the use of not being able to sit with the stones, the rubies, in a sense that you wouldn't have anything else to do with it. It was a genius idea from Dante.
So if you do have any old jewelry that you do want to remake, we can definitely use your old stones. If there are chips and stuff, we can still use chipped stones. We'll just offer a bit of advice in terms of setting them and so forth. We can mix, if you don't have enough stones to complete a design, you can mix them with, let's call them new stones or supplied stones from us, or from wherever, generally, to create the design that you're looking for. You can even, as we mentioned in last night's episode, you can trade in gold to reduce the cost, which is also the case in this ring as well. All the gold from her old jewelry was traded in to bring down the cost of this ring as well. To get this ring, honestly, it didn't cost the client much, just because we were reusing so much, and it was just the new gold that we used and labor, which was considered part of the cost. So that does mark the end of tonight's episode. If you do have any further questions, you're welcome to send a few comments through. We are going to keep the stream open for just a few more minutes. However, if you come up with a question later tonight, you can comment on the video once it's posted, or you can send us an email to either Charles or myself. Our emails are on screen. And then also I do want to remind you of our stream tomorrow night, which will be tips and tricks that the jewelry trade doesn't always let you know about. So this will be covering a few more tips on diamond buys, as well as how to use gold more effectively, cleaning, and quite a few other options. How to look at the diamond certificate to ensure that you have a good buy and that you aren't taken for a ride.
Yeah, after tomorrow's episode, if you can call it that, you would have more knowledge than the average person in the retail shops. And that is said, well, that's a fact. And if you've watched from episode 1 all the way up until now and tomorrow, that means you know more than 90% of the people out there, sometimes more than 90% of the staff in the retail outlets.
So the following, I see that we have a comment. You have shown some designs not practical. What do you think is practical? All right, thank you very much for that message. So let's have a chat about practical designs quickly. So a practical design is something with enough claws to keep it in place. If you are rough on your hands, a bezel setting is the safest option. And that is basically a tube setting, so gold goes all the way around a diamond. That is the safest setting for a diamond because it's protected from knocks. Also, you would really have to mishandle a tube setting for the stone to pop out.
Yeah, the most important there is to always keep the under bezel, which is the thin bar just below the girdle or the side of the diamond. I don't know who of you have watched the first episode, but that is always a plus. If you remove that, the length of the claw becomes too long, even though it is short. Remember that your metals are pliable, so any force, even the slightest force, if the distance is too long between the top of the claw and the piece where it is tightened, if that's too long, it will bend easily. As shown here on the screen, that is what you call an under bezel. It's just without the stones being added to the under bezel. That is a very safe option, whether you go for 4 claws or 6 claws. Your 4 claws are sufficient. 6 claws, once again, personal preference between 4 claws and 6 claws. But if your stone is set with the under bezel, whether it be 4 claws or 6 claws, it will be 100% safe. Still, it is required for you to see a reputable jeweler if you feel you knock your ring very hard, or just out of good practice once a year or once every 18 months, which is always good.
Most designs that you do see in a jewelry catalog are sound designs. There's only a very few that we would advise against. However, most designs are generally alright. You'll notice that the designs that we've shown tonight are slightly out there and not your average ring. However, the point of tonight was basically to talk about elements which you should avoid, and not specifically these rings. So, as Charles mentioned, 4 claws or 6 claws. That is quite an interesting point. 6 claws are becoming a bit more popular, which is the same as on this slide. If you have a look at the top here, those are 6 claws, which is also a much safer setting for your diamond, because if 2 claws break off, then only the stone can start sliding out. If 3 claws break off, then your stone is very much loose. So if we then look at the next design, this has 4 claws. If only 1 claw breaks off, there is a chance for the stone to slide sideways. If 2 claws break off, it's gone. So 6 claws, safer option. However, claws do not break off spontaneously either. So don't think that 4 claws is gambling with your jewelry. If you don't go do extreme sporting with your rings, it should be fine.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We neglected to show you the practical rings, so thanks for bringing that to our attention. We appreciate it, Cheryl.
If tonight has been very interesting to you at all, I'm going to put a poll up quickly, which will help us quite a bit. The poll is now active, so if you could just give us a bit of feedback in terms of how the presentation went, that will help us greatly with our future endeavors to bring a bit more information to the public. So the poll is open. We are probably going to end within the next minute. I'm just going to give you a bit of time to answer the poll. And yeah, and then we'll be back here tomorrow for our final episode. It would be much appreciated if you could share it with your friends that might be interested. Tomorrow is going to be, it's more general, so anyone that is looking to buy a ring would benefit from it, as well as anyone that owns any piece of jewelry, actually. So we are going to basically close the stream, I guess, now.
Yeah, thank you once again for attending. Thanks for the interaction. It always makes it pleasurable.
All right, thank you guys very much for joining, and please remember to join in tomorrow for our final episode, and have a great night. Thanks. Cheers.